Welcome to Washington, D.C. Yes, we are coming to you from the Longworth office building. We are joined by Jim Costa. I'm Brad Pomerance, of course, and Mr. Costa is a member of the United States Congress representing significant portions of the Central Valley. And sir, I must ask you about your constituents. We are facing a drought like we have never seen before.
Drought.
Yeah. How are your constituents doing, sir?
Well, it's difficult. This is the third consecutive dry year, and the cumulative effects, I think, are frightful. We have a situation where before these last storms, we had 13% of our average snowpack, 13%. And our carryover water on our reservoirs normally at this time of year is 40 to 60%, and it's 20 to 30% right now in terms of water that's behind the reservoir. So the cumulative effect is bad. And while the rains have been helpful here in the last week, the fact is that we would need water of biblical proportions, 40 days, 40 nights, really to get us to a position where we could try to make a real difference. I mean, most people don't understand in California, we get most of our moisture between November and March, and this is March.
The big question becomes, what do we do for the future? We can talk about the current state now, but the big buzzword we've been hearing is storage. We need more storage. Your friends on the Republican side have been talking about storage for some time. In fact, they proposed a bill that was passed with Republican votes, as well as one California Democrat, yourself.
Right.
Talk to us about Mr. Valledeo's bill and why you decided to move forward.
Well, I voted for that bill. I voted for a version of it several years ago, and there are a lot of good aspects as it allows us to create flexibility in both the federal and state water projects to move water. And the storage component in the measure is something that I've supported in the past. But in that bill, there was no federal funding for those storage projects, which I question because, frankly, most of the major projects in California have had a share of local, state, and federal funding. Now, if there's not going to be any federal funding, I don't see how we're going to get some of these storage projects built. Last week, I introduced legislation on 5 related storage projects. They're the same, but we provide a federal cost-sharing component in that for Shasta,
right,
for Sites Reservoir that will be introduced this week that I'm a co-sponsor on. Los Vasqueros is going to be up to the Contra Costa folks. Enlargement of San Luis Reservoir, which is in my district, it's a state and federal shared project. We could add 400,000 acre-feet of water to that. And Temperance Flat, which is near my district, that would produce the flexibility of moving water north and south without the problems associated with the Delta.
So exciting possibilities in terms of storage.
I think this is the time that we have an opportunity to come together on a bipartisan basis on storage. We need it. And in the governor's long-term proposal, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, storage is envisioned, and they're looking at a water bond this November.
Let's talk about the water bond, because there is money set aside in the water bond, whatever version may wind up moving forward. The Democrats looking towards $1.5 billion, the Republicans looking for about $3 billion. Is either figure enough?
No, I think, frankly, from the previous bond that they're going to have to amend in some fashion if they reach an agreement, and I think they will. We're talking about something less than the $11 billion, but probably around $8 billion, I would hope, of which I think over half of it should be dedicated for storage. So I'm talking $4 or $5 billion.
Are your friends in the Democratic Party agreeing with you? Because when I go to Sacramento, their numbers are much lower. I mean, 1.5 billion is what they're saying.
A lot of this is negotiations,
sure,
and I think the governor will weigh in, and I think when the governor weighs in, that will make a big difference. I think they're also looking to see what we can agree to here in Washington on a package that deals with some version of the Feinstein-Costa legislation or the Valledeo legislation, and what kind of component we have for storage.
When we come back, I want to continue this conversation. Okay. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. Sir, I'd like to speak with you about immigration as well, a very important issue in your district. A lot of folks work in agriculture. Some may be documented, some may not be documented. What are they saying to you about their desires behind immigration reform?
Well, I think there's a strong consensus, bipartisan consensus in the San Joaquin Valley and in much of California to fix a broken immigration system. If we have a broken water system in California, we have a broken immigration system in America. And it's time we fix it. You know, I was for the Kennedy-McCain measure when Senator Kennedy was still alive. And I've supported a version of ag jobs. And the Senate bill that passed last year on a bipartisan basis, strong bipartisan vote, historic, I think if it were on the House floor tomorrow, would pass because I think there are sufficient Democratic and Republican votes to pass that.
And some of your colleagues in the Republican caucus in California would agree with you.
Yes.
But the challenge is, how does that bill get to the floor for those that are looking to see it to come to the floor?
Well, the real problem is the internal debate, the intramural debate among the Republican conference. Some, sadly, refer to the Senate bill as amnesty. It's not amnesty. If you, in fact, have to prove that you have a job and that you basically indicate that you came here illegally, you pay a fine for coming here illegally, and then for 5 years you have to show that you've maintained employment, that any back fines or fees or penalties you have paid or taxes, and then after 5 years you have the ability to then apply for a green card. And then after 7 years, after being a good
permanent resident,
then on the 13th year you have the ability to apply for citizenship. That is a earned path. It is not amnesty, period.
So Speaker Boehner, a couple weeks back, maybe a month back, was looking at that very element. He had some concerns about actual citizenship granting after a certain period of time, and he seemed to be focused more on permanent residence, a green card. The president, who had been very clear he wanted to see a path to citizenship, seemed to be willing to negotiate on that point. But yet, even with that pronouncement, it seems as if Speaker Boehner has pulled back a bit on
Well,
it.
and I think that's, again, because of the internal politics within the Republican conference. I mean, let's be honest. The Republicans have tied themselves in knots on this thing. I mean, you know, we heard Mitch McConnell argue that, you know, we just don't trust this president on the basis of the first point, which is security, increased security, even though we've deported more people than any other administration in history, which he's been criticized for, and we've more than tripled the Border Patrol agents over the last 5 years.
Senator
Schumer said, right, if it's security that, and you don't trust this president, we can deal with that easily. We'll make it effective 2017. And they went, So what the fact of the matter is internally, some of these folks simply do not want to deal with this issue, you know, see everything as amnesty when it's not. And I think, frankly, there's an anti-immigrant sentiment among some within the conference on this issue. Otherwise, how else can you explain it?
But what's also interesting, if you look at that, and I've thought about that very issue, is for some of these members of the Republican conference, they live in districts with virtually no immigrants.
Correct.
And so it could be that they simply, the issue is not of importance.
Well, and it is in California, and it is in my district.
We understand.
You know, 58% of my district is Hispanic, and there's very, very strong feelings on this issue, not just among that community, but also among the farmers. I mean, 70% of our workforce in the Valley are folks that are believed to be here illegally. And so I think there is a common cause for all the right reasons, both in terms of the merits, and it, of course, works itself on the politics. But 80 congressional districts after the 2010 reapportionment have less minorities, and you know, then I think feel less compelled to deal with this issue. And I think that's where a lot of the anti-immigrant feelings come from.
You mentioned the farmers, presumably business owners,
right,
and they have been very strong and clear that they would like to see immigration reform.
Oh, yeah.
A constituency, presumably, of the Republican Party.
Yes.
Will that push the party toward reform?
They've worked very hard to convince Republican leadership, not only in California, but back here in Washington, that they would like this problem fixed. They negotiated the agreements on the language of the Senate bill. This coalition, I mean, when you think about it, is as broad a bipartisan coalition as I can think of. You have the United States Chamber of Commerce, you have the Farm Bureau organizations and all the other ag organizations. You have businesses throughout the country that are supportive of this. You have a faith-based organization of religious groups that run the spectrum of the United States. And yet, it seemingly is very difficult to get that
I want
across.
to thank you for joining us. My name is Brad Pomerance, coming to you from Washington, D.C.
Good to be with you again.